3 days before my college graduation ceremony, my mother called me at 11 p.m. I remember exactly where I was, sitting cross-legged on my apartment floor, surrounded by cap and gown packaging I'd just opened, the tassel still in my hand. I'd been looking at it for a good 5 minutes, just holding it, thinking about everything it took to get here. 6 years, 2 schools, 1 medical withdrawal semester that nearly broke me. A part-time job at a coffee shop for 3 of those years where I smelled like toner every single day. I answered on the second ring because that's what I always did with my mother. Conditioned response. Like a dog that keeps coming back even after it's been shooed away enough times. "Hey, Mom." She didn't say congratulations. She didn't ask if I was nervous. The first thing out of her mouth was, "I need to talk to you about Sunday." I set the tassel down. She told me that my younger sister Faye had booked a brunch reservation that same morning, a birthday brunch even though Faye's birthday wasn't for another 3 weeks, and that the whole family had already RSVP'd. My aunt, my uncle, both sets of cousins. My grandmother, who apparently had already told Faye she'd be there. "The ceremony's at 10, I said. "You know that. You've known that since January." "The reservation is at 10:30, my mother said, like that was an answer. "And you know how Faye gets when plans change last minute." I know exactly how Faye gets. I've known how Faye gets my entire life. Faye gets loud. Faye gets tearful in a way that makes everyone in the room scramble to fix whatever upset her, even if what upset her was someone else's happiness existing in proximity to hers. "Mom, this is my graduation," she sighed. That specific sigh, the one that meant I was being difficult, that I was making things harder than they needed to be. "I know, sweetheart, but Faye planned this weeks ago, and it's not like graduation ceremonies are that long. Maybe you could, I don't know. Could we do dinner instead? The whole family, Sunday evening to celebrate you?" Dinner. Sunday evening. After I walked across a stage that nobody from my family would be in the audience to watch. I said okay. I don't know why I said okay. I think part of me still believed, even after 28 years of evidence to the contrary, that someone would come through. That my dad would step in. That my grandmother would realize what she was doing. That someone would choose me. I hung up the phone. I sat there for a long time. Then I put the tassel back in the box, very carefully, like it was fragile, and I didn't cry until I was in the shower, where I couldn't hear myself. I need to back up, because none of this happened in a vacuum. Growing up, Faye was the one who shone, and I want to be careful here, because I loved my sister. I still love my sister. In that complicated, bruised way you love someone who has been both your closest companion and the reason your childhood felt like a competition you never signed up for. Faye was funny and magnetic and could walk into any room and make people feel like the lights got brighter. I was the quiet one. The reader. The one who stayed in her room. My parents didn't manufacture the favoritism consciously, I don't think. It was more like water finding its level. Faye's needs were louder, more immediate, more visible, and so they got met first, always first. And the quieter my needs were, the more invisible they became. Report cards, school plays, the regional science fair where I placed third and my dad couldn't make it because Faye had a dance recital he'd already promised to attend. I learned to stop expecting. That's what happens when you grow up in that kind of house. You don't become bitter overnight. You just quietly lower your own ceiling inch by inch until you stop reaching for things you've decided aren't yours to have. College was where I started unlearning that. 6 years of slowly, painfully figuring out that I was allowed to want things. That finishing a degree, a real one, a hard one, a bachelor's in biomedical science with a minor in chemistry, after everything, was worth being proud of. And I was proud. I was so proud I could barely breathe when I thought about it, which is maybe why what my mother said hit me the way it did. Not just hurt, something deeper than hurt. Something that felt like confirmation of a fear I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten I was carrying it. I didn't tell many people what happened. I'm a private person by nature. And there's a particular kind of shame in admitting that your family chose a birthday brunch over your graduation. It feels like an indictment of your own worth, even when you know logically it isn't. But I told my neighbor, Mr. Adkins. He's been in the unit across the hall from me for 4 years. Retired civil engineer, widower, grows tomatoes on his balcony with the level of devotion most people reserve for raising children. He knocked on my door the morning after my mother's call because he'd ordered too much coffee from the cafe downstairs and didn't want it to go to waste, which I later understood was his way of checking on me because he'd heard me come home the night before, and something in the sound of my footsteps told him I wasn't okay. We sat at my kitchen table and I told him the whole thing. He listened the way he always does, completely, without interrupting, without the reflexive platitudes people reach for when they don't know what to say. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Are you walking?" "What?" "Sunday. Are you still walking across that stage?" "I mean, yes, of course." He nodded slowly. "Then you'll have someone in that audience." He said it simply, without ceremony, like he was telling me the weather. I didn't know what to say. I think I said something like, "You don't have to do that," and he looked at me over the rim of his coffee cup with an expression that made me feel about 6 years old in the best possible way and said, "I know I don't have to." Sunday came. I curled my hair, which I almost never do, put on the pearl earrings I'd bought myself as a graduation gift the week before the phone call, back when I still thought everyone would be there. I almost took them off. I kept them on. Mr. Atkins met me in the hallway at 8:15. He was wearing a jacket, a proper blazer, dark navy, looked like it had been pressed the night before. He had a small bouquet of flowers, sunflowers, and white daisies wrapped in craft paper. He'd clearly gone to an actual florist and not a grocery store. I genuinely could not speak for a moment. He offered me his arm and said, "Ready?" We took the 9 train downtown. He insisted on buying my coffee from the cart outside the venue and argued with me about it for almost a block before I gave in. He asked me what my thesis had been on, and I explained the basics of biofilm resistance research for the 3rd time since we'd become neighbors. And he asked follow-up questions that made it clear he'd actually listened the previous 2 times. Inside the auditorium, he found us seats, good seats, center section, close enough to see the stage clearly. He had the program in his hands before I'd even sat down, reading through it carefully, finding my name in the list of graduates. "There you are," he said, and tapped the page. I looked away before he could see my face. When they called my name, I walked across that stage, and I shook hands with the dean, and I accepted my diploma cover, and I turned to face the audience for the photograph. I found him immediately. He was standing, actually on his feet, the only person in the section who was fully standing, with the sunflower bouquet pressed to his chest like he wasn't sure what to do with it, clapping as hard as a 68-year-old man with mild arthritis in his left hand could clap. I smiled for that photograph, a real one, the kind that reaches your eyes. My family did show up that day, as it turned out. They came to the ceremony, my mother and father, my aunt and uncle, 2 cousins, my grandmother. They'd apparently decided to do both, skip the first part of Faye's brunch to make it to the tail end of the ceremony. They arrived somewhere around the midpoint when the C's and D's were still being called, and found seats near the back. I didn't know any of this until after. One of my cousins texted me during the ceremony. I saw it when I checked my phone after walking. Just a row of clapping hands emojis and a "W made it" that I think was supposed to feel like a gift. After the ceremony, in the courtyard outside, I found my family clustered near the fountain. My mother hugged me and said she was so proud. My father shook my hand, he's not a hugger, and said, "You did it, kid." My grandmother held my face in both hands and told me I looked beautiful. And I stood there, in the sunshine, in my cap and gown, with my diploma tucked under my arm, and I felt nothing. Not anger. Not relief. Just a strange, clear-eyed nothing, like looking through glass at something happening in a room you're not inside. Mr. Atkins had waited a respectful distance away. I introduced him. My mother said, "Oh, how nice that you came," in a tone that suggested she didn't quite understand the shape of what she was looking at. My father shook his hand. My grandmother, who is the sharpest person in our family even at 79, looked at the sunflower bouquet that Mr. Atkins was now holding out to me and then looked at my face, and something moved behind her eyes that I don't have a word for. We went to lunch, the full group, a restaurant my mother had reserved weeks ago, assuming correctly that we'd want to eat after. It was a nice enough lunch. My aunt asked about my plans, and I talked about the lab internship I'd lined up for the fall. My uncle made a joke I didn't understand. Faye, who had apparently left her own brunch midway through, arrived 40 minutes late with a sunburn and the residual energy of someone who'd already had 2 mimosas, hugged me tight and said, "I'm so sorry I missed it. I'm the worst. I love you." I hugged her back. I meant it. It's possible to love someone and also see them clearly. I've had a lot of practice. Mr. Atkins did not come to lunch. He said he had tomatoes to check on, which was probably true, and also gave me the space to be with my family without an audience for the complicated feelings that came with it. That's the kind of person he is. He understands when to step in and when to step back. 6 months after graduation, I started the position at the research lab. It's hard and it's underpaid, and I love it in a way I didn't know I was capable of loving work. The PI, my supervisor, Dr. Pied, UN, is exacting in a way that initially terrified me and now makes me a better scientist every single day. My sister Faye, around that same time, started having trouble with her boyfriend. I won't go into the specifics because they're not mine to share, but things deteriorated over the winter in ways that left her needing support our parents weren't fully equipped to give. She called me once, late on a Tuesday, and we talked for 2 hours. Real talking. Not the surface-level careful talking we'd done for most of our adult lives. She said something during that call that I've thought about many times since. She said, "I think I've been really selfish. I think I've been selfish my whole life, and I didn't notice because nobody ever made me notice." I didn't rush to reassure her. I thought she deserved the honesty of letting that sit. "I think you're noticing now," I said. She was quiet. "Then, were you really hurt? About graduation?" I took a breath. "Yeah, I really was. I didn't plan the brunch to conflict with it on purpose. I genuinely didn't think about the dates." "I know," I said. "That's sort of the whole problem." She cried a little. I let her. Then I told her I didn't want to live in the past, and I meant that too, not as a brush-off, but as a genuine statement of where I was trying to put my energy. Forward. Into the lab, into my friendships, into the life I was slowly, carefully building for myself. We're different now, Faye and I. Not fixed exactly. I don't think family dynamics have a fixed setting. I think they're always in process, but different, more honest. She asks me real questions now and waits for real answers. I've stopped assuming she won't handle the truth. The thing nobody tells you about growing up as the overlooked kid in a family is that eventually, if you do the work, you get to choose what your life looks like. The family you were born into is one part of the story. It's not the whole story. I have people now, real, solid, showing up people. There's my best friend from undergrad, who flew in from Portland the morning of my graduation. She'd booked the flight months ago when I'd told her the date and changed it twice when her own work schedule shifted. She was running late and hit traffic and called me from an Uber in a panic and made it to her seat approximately 4 minutes before my name was called. There's Dr. UN, who wrote me a recommendation letter so detailed and specific that I read it once, printed it, and keep it in a folder I return to when imposter syndrome gets loud. And there's Mr. Carl Adkins, who is now officially the godfather of my balcony herb garden, which I started because he shamed me, gently and lovingly, into growing something. My parents and I have a functional, cordial relationship. We talk on Sundays mostly. I've had one direct conversation with my mother, about 6 months after graduation, where I told her how her phone call made me feel. She didn't fully understand. She tried. That's about as much as I can ask. My father, who has never been someone who talks about feelings, sent me a text when I got my first paycheck from the lab. Just, "Proud of you." 2 words. For him, that's a lot. I saved it. Last spring, the lab had a small celebration for the team after a paper we'd contributed to was accepted for publication. Dr. Ewan brought a cake, lemon, which is not my favorite, but I ate 2 pieces anyway because that's what you do at celebrations. My Portland friend called during my walk home to hear the whole story. I was crossing the intersection near my building when my phone buzzed with a text from my grandmother. She doesn't text often. She's 79 and treats her phone with a kind of polite suspicion, as though it might do something unexpected if provoked. The text said, "I heard about your paper. I always knew you had something special in you. I'm sorry I didn't always show up the way you needed. I love you. Grandma." I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Someone behind me said, "Excuse me," and went around. I stood there and read it 3 more times. Then I called my grandmother and she picked up on the first ring and she said, "Oh good, I wasn't sure if I sent that right," and I laughed. And then I was crying and she said, "I know, sweetheart, I know." And we talked for 40 minutes and she told me about her own mother, who had been hard and withholding in ways she'd never fully worked through. And she said she could see the pattern and hadn't known how to break it and she was sorry. I told her it wasn't too late. I meant it. I am 30 years old now, and I have learned this. The people who show up for you are not always the people you expected. Sometimes the person who stands up in the middle of an auditorium and claps with arthritic hands is your neighbor who grows tomatoes and drinks too much coffee. Sometimes the person who calls you after a publication and asks every question right is someone you met in a campus library during finals week 7 years ago. Sometimes the apology you needed comes in a poorly formatted text from a 79-year-old woman who isn't sure she pressed send. Family is not the people who are supposed to love you. Family is the people who actually do. And the life I have built, my work, my plants, my people, my slowly healing relationships with the family I was born into, is mine. I made it. Out of the hard years and the quiet disappointments and the graduation tassel I almost put away for good. I kept the tassel. It's hanging on the corner of my bookshelf where I can see it every morning. Some days I look at it and feel proud. Some days I look at it and feel the old ache of that phone call, that late night on the floor, the sunflowers Mr. Atkins picked out at a florist because he thought I deserved real flowers. Most days I feel both at once, and I've learned that's okay, to hold the grief and the gratitude in the same hands, to let the hurt be real without letting it be the ending, to keep walking forward even when the aisle is yours to walk alone, because sometimes the people worth having are already waiting for you on the other side. I used to think the hardest part of growing up overlooked was the missing, the empty seats, the unanswered calls, the quiet moments where you realize again that you ranked second. But I've learned something since that Sunday morning in the auditorium. The hardest part isn't the missing. It's the unlearning, deciding after years of lowered ceilings that you are actually allowed to want things, that you are worth showing up for. What my family did, choosing a birthday brunch over my graduation, wasn't malicious. That's the part that took me longest to sit with. There was no villain plotting in a back room. There was just a decades-old habit of making phase needs the center of gravity and me quietly orbiting that center, smaller and smaller, until I'd nearly convinced myself that orbit was just my natural place. Actions, though, have weight. Even the quiet ones. Even the ones made without thinking. My parents chose convenience over presence at one of the most significant moments of my life, and that choice landed somewhere in me and stayed. That's not punishment. That's just how it works. What we do or don't do accumulates. It builds into something the other person has to carry. Mr. Adkins didn't owe me anything. He's my neighbor. He grows tomatoes. He drinks too much coffee and asks follow-up questions about biofilm research because he actually paid attention the first time. He showed up in that auditorium with pressed clothes and a florist bouquet because he decided on his own, without being asked, that I deserved to have someone there. That decision cost him a Sunday morning. It gave me something I still reach for on the hard days. I think about that a lot, the asymmetry of it, how little it cost him, how much it meant. And I think about Faye calling me months later, saying she'd finally noticed something in herself she didn't like, asking if I'd been hurt. The fact that she asked, that she could sit with the discomfort of the answer, told me something had shifted. She didn't get a pass because she asked, but she got a door. That's what honesty opens when you choose it. Not absolution, just the possibility of something different. The intelligence I'm most proud of isn't in my thesis or my lab results. It's the kind I had to build slowly out of hard years, learning to see my situation clearly without either excusing it or being destroyed by it. Learning that I could love my family and also refuse to shrink myself to make room for dynamics that hurt me. Learning that both things could be true at once. My grandmother's text, badly formatted, sent on a Tuesday afternoon, probably agonized over for days, cracked something open in me I didn't know was still sealed. She's 79 years old and she looked at a pattern that had run through her family for generations and she named it. That takes a kind of moral courage that has nothing to do with age or circumstance. It has to do with character. With deciding that honesty, even when it's late, is still worth something. I kept the tassel on my bookshelf. I kept Mr. Gersporid, Adkins sunflowers until they dried, then kept the dried ones a little longer. I kept my grandmother's text saved in a folder I don't open often, but know is there. The life I have is one I built from the pieces I had. Some of those pieces were jagged. Some were given to me by a neighbor who drinks too much coffee and has arthritis in his left hand and still stood up and clapped as hard as he could. I'll take those pieces, every single one.